Enduro Method is an online strength and conditioning program built for those who ride by those who ride. We are professional coaches dedicated to building the best and most revolutionary off and on the bike training for dirt bikers around. Enduro Method offers a monthly subscription which gives you access to our ongoing current training program. By subscribing to Enduro Method, you receive our Iron Track, which is for those who have a gym or gym equipment, and our Gravity Track for those with minimal to no equipment. We design our training for riders who want to keep their general physical preparedness in top form year-round. If you are interested in joining the monthly Enduro Method training subscription, we are offering a special discount for our podcast listeners. Use discount code EMPodcast23 in all caps for 50% off your first month of training. See the show notes where you can find discount codes and a link for more information and to sign up for Enduro Method. And now, on to the show. Hello, friends. Today on the show, we have Donald Funke. Donald started using Enduro Method a couple years ago, and pretty soon after he started sending me emails with questions he had regarding what we were doing and why, which I actually enjoy and encourage. Donald is a 61-year-old practicing chiropractic and personal trainer down in Montrose, Colorado. He's only been riding for a couple years and recently reached out and asked if we could do a podcast together, but with the roles reversed. He thought it would be interesting to ask questions more specific to himself and his current riding and fitness journey, and how to approach things for older riders in general, in the gym and on the bike. We had a great conversation and hope to do something similar again in the future. All right, welcome to the Enduro Method Podcast. Josh Rempel here today, and a little bit different format today. We're joined by Donald Funk, and Donald has, let's see, I think we met, you had signed up for Enduro Method at one point.
Right.
Been probably a couple of years at this point, year or two at least.
Last year, I think maybe last winter of 22, maybe.
Okay. And yeah, so been on and off, kind of used our stuff. And then you've also been doing your own thing and going your own route a little bit with training and learning and riding and incorporating everything. And you'd reached out with the idea of kind of interviewing me from the perspective of, you know, where you're at, a little bit older, riding not quite as long, and in regards to training specifically. And we thought it'd be really cool to do, just because, well, you can get a lot more direct with, you know, where you're at and everything,
Right.
instead of these kind of broad brushstrokes of sometimes how we go over stuff and stuff gets missed. And there's questions always in those little details that are kind of cool and important to touch on that don't always get answered. So let's start off. Maybe Donald, give a little brief history of you, where you're at with training, riding, and all that stuff.
Yeah, I was fascinated by dirt bikes when I was a kid, but my father was like, no way, I'm not, his idea was like, buy your kid a dirt bike. It's the last gift you'll ever have to give him. So, so I never got to ride much when I was young. And we had a motorcycle that we used for transportation when we were teenagers, but that was about it. And then when I was about 19, this was like 1980, 79. I had a Can-Am 250 that I ripped around for a while until I got a ticket and had to sell it to pay the ticket. So then I went to college, became a chiropractor, practiced chiropractic for years and still do, and became a personal trainer, moved to Montrose, Colorado, which is like a dirt bike mecca. And I said, I got to start riding again. And so I did. My original adventure was, I bought a 350 and drove it home from the guy I bought it from, and my neck hurt so bad that I couldn't ride it, and I sold it within 2 weeks. I had been in a car accident in 2017, a 70-mile-an-hour rollover. So I had a lot of neck issues going on. And then I started going to the gym and getting stronger and working through it. And then took a couple of dirt bike lessons from Enduro Ranch, which is in this area, and Ian Lenning. And it showed me that, hey, I can probably do this, physically. And so I bought another bike. I bought a 300 last year, and rode that for 6 months or so, and then I sold that and bought a 22 300 XCW. And I've probably got maybe, I'm guessing like 120 hours in the last year and a half. So I'm definitely a novice, and I haven't ridden my whole life like a lot of the guys that I ride with. So, it's definitely some challenges keeping up and doing some of the things I'd like to do with them. I played around with entering some enduros, and I'm 61 years old, so there's an over 60 group, and the races there are about an hour and 15 minutes. And so fortunately, it's not the 4 hours that the younger guys do. And so that's influenced kind of my training, what kind I can expect. And that's been really a challenge for me, is what do I need to accept given my age and physical capabilities, and how much can I push? And I'm guessing that with everybody, it's a little bit different. So that's what I'm trying to do, is figure out how far can I push and still make progress without, recurring injuries. And some of the questions I've had that have been bouncing around in my head as I watch videos on YouTube and read the Enduro Method information and listen to your podcast is, it's just a little bit different for us older guys. And, it seems like my biggest challenge is bike skills. So it's like, well, why should I, and this was kind of my thinking for the last years, like, why should I, spend all this time in the gym when it's my bike skills that are really hurting and holding me back? And I was wondering what you would have to say about that, Josh.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely an interesting question. I think the ability to ride, like how much you can put in per week, is obviously a factor. If you have the ability to either ride close to your house or even at your house, it becomes much easier. Obviously, if you have to drive somewhere 30, 45 minutes just to unload the bike and get it out, just practicing skills is going to be much more difficult. I think keeping the mindset that if you are practicing skills and drills, it does not have to be a 2 hour ordeal. Like, you can get a lot done in 20 minutes. And that's not going to beat you up, but that's going to compound over weeks and months of doing that. And it's going to really pay dividends when you are able to ride longer. So if you can do stuff in your driveway, like cone drills, balance drills, figure eights, clutch control, working on getting the front end up consistently. You don't even have to have an object or obstacle. Just cones alone and a little bit of flat space is going to be huge. And that will pay off over time. That I think depends on the person. Like, I really enjoy that stuff. And when I first started, I didn't realize how terrible I was at it. Like, I think it's very easy to overlook those things too. I know Rich puts out so much content on this stuff and, harps on the fact that, like, don't laugh till you try it, because it's going to be very humbling. It is. And, like, to me, that's very exciting, because it's something that you can improve on immediately in front of you. And every time you go out, you're a little better, a little tighter with the cones, or however you have it set up. But not everybody enjoys that.
Right. I find I really enjoy that kind of thing. And I notice a big improvement in my riding. Like, sometimes I'll do that one day, and then the next day I'll be out riding with a friend, and we'll hit a rock section, and I'll get through it with no dabs. I'm like, wow, that I couldn't do that last week. That was
Right.
directly related to those cone drills back there.
Totally. Just balance and clutch control alone, and braking being smoother, more confident, right? I think a lot of that too is when you see something that's intimidating, your first thought is not necessarily being able to stay balanced and stay on the pegs and trust the traction. It's more like you already have an out in your head before you even enter, which obviously, if it's a dangerous, potentially like a lot of exposure or something, absolutely have a
Yeah.
place to put your foot going into it. But on the stuff where maybe it's just a little tip over, you've already created this pattern of, like, I'm going to dab here. And then, of course, right when you go into it, you dab there. And then, whatever, instead of that confidence and balance and control of going in and planning to make it through without putting the foot down.
Right.
And I think those drills give you that because it's flat ground, less consequence for, getting hurt. Very comfortable because usually it's in a spot that you're very familiar with. You're not out, 10 miles in on a trail by yourself or something. So I think all that stuff adds in that confidence area. And then just confidence alone provides a lot when you are doing these things out on the trail. Yeah, I'm trying to not lose the thread of the question. So more or less, how much time do you spend doing these things in
Right.
the trade-off of like energy per week kind of thing?
Right. Yeah. Usually I'm doing like one afternoon of drills for maybe 45 minutes and then riding on the weekend. And I was riding trails twice a week. And since then I've kind of cut back. I'm starting a new business and there's a lot of energy that needs to go into that. So like we were talking one day, it's really about 4 hours. If you want to ride for 2 hours, it's a 4 hour commitment,
Right.
plus all the energy that goes into that. And when you're starting a new business, that energy and time is very valuable. So I've tried to hone that in with the cone drills and do less of just going out and beating myself up. Because what I also find is that out riding trails, there's a certain life of that for me, meaning I can get about 2 hours in and then the endurance is a problem. And then some neck issues from old accidents and things like that start showing up, so that it takes, several days to recover from that. So I really like the cone drills in the fact that there's very little impact, but a lot of balance challenges. So I can see where that's very valuable.
Yeah. And this is where, it's hard to put big generalities on what should be done per week or whatever. But I I do think like the more consistent you can be over time with shorter periods of abstinence in between, the better off you're going to be, right? So if you go out once a week and ride really hard for 3 or 4 hours or 5 or 6 hours, let's say, but that's all you can do. Obviously, do what you can. But if there's opportunity to break that into two, where you're going 2 or 3 days, getting a dose, and then 2 or 3 days and you're getting the next dose, I would imagine that's a little bit better of a way to do it. And then if you can even bring that back down a little bit on your big day to where you're not feeling completely destroyed for a couple of days, and add a little bit more volume on that other day, even better. If you could break that into 3 days, again, there's the, travel and riding and all that stuff, which plays a part. And, I'm lucky enough where we are here. Well, somewhat lucky and somewhat unlucky, right? We get 8 months of winter and 4 months of summer, but when we have it, I can ride at the house or ride from the house and take off. And even riding from the house to a little, loop I got hard enduro training, it's 15-minute drive up or ride up. But by the time I gear up, leave from the garage, get there, do some motos and come back down, it's 2 hours. And that's not even having to load my bike up and leave.
Right.
And if I go to the other side, which is still only a 15-minute drive, it's a 3 hour thing. And that's only for about an hour of motos of work and rest, that's not like a long 2 hour, 3 hour ride.
Right.
So I think all those things come into play a lot for people. And that's where the gym can be very advantageous and time efficient.
Mm-hmm. That's exactly what I'm finding right now is like the last few weeks, I haven't had the time to go out and do as much riding. So I've spent more time in the gym. And it's not coincidental that I had the best ride of my life, this past weekend. And that the balance felt there better, the strength was better, the aerobic tenacity, let's say, because I mean, in 2 weeks, I'm probably not developing a huge aerobic capacity at the gym, but it may be just the aerobic tenacity. to persevere, and that seemed to provide one of the best, like I said, one of the best rides of my life. So it was very interesting because throughout the summer, I was just like, no, I just got to get out there. I got to ride more. I got to ride more. And for my particular situation at my age with my physical challenges, it wasn't working very well because, I was just kind of continually dealing with old injuries instead of making progress. So I understand what you're saying. And the races for my age group are like 75 minutes long, fortunately, and not 4 hours long like the guys in your class. And how would that influence the way I train?
Yeah, I think the general principles kind of stick, but you don't have to probably spend as much time doing the zone 2 volume work, I would think. Well, maybe not zone 2 volume, but I think you still need to do some anaerobic work, interval work one day. You still need to do some aerobic threshold, which, also like lactate threshold, all fairly similar, on another day. And then you want to spend some time in that longer duration as well. And for most endurance, I mean, again, there's 100 different ways to skin a cat, but as a general rule, that's a very good setup for training for anything that's kind of endurance. And I think of hard enduro for the most part, or even enduro is mostly an endurance sport. Obviously, people are always debating that with the heart rates, but it's like, if you're out there for anything over 10 minutes, you're not anaerobic the entire time. There's periods of anaerobic for sure,
Right.
but it's literally not possible. I think there's a big misconception of what it feels like emotionally and mentally out there and like what's actually happening. Even the best in the sport are not anaerobic the entire time. It's just they're in such good condition and so efficient on the machine, their level and speed, they can stay aerobic while all of us would be anaerobic trying to keep up at that pace, right?
Right.
And so you still want to work the anaerobic, you want to work the threshold, and then you want to work your long, slow distance as
Right.
much as possible. And then with that, the strength work side of things. So like a really cool kind of analogy that, well, I kind of stole from somebody else and then added some things. But if you think of like a box and inside of the matches, right? So you got a box of matches. Think of your body as like the structure, the integrity of the box itself. So if you got a cardboard box, not super strong, gets stepped on, squished, dropped, it's going to dent, break, whatever. But if you have a wood box, maybe it's a little stronger, but maybe it's not that pliable. So maybe, I don't know what kind of material, but you want a durable box, right? That doesn't break easy, bends instead of breaks or snaps. So that could be getting strong enough for the sport. There's obviously a limit, right? Where that's going to be advantageous and it's going to be its own thing, but strong enough. And then within that, you have the size of the box is kind of your aerobic capacity. So you could have a really small box with a lot of matches inside, and I'll get to matches in a second, or a bigger box, which then can hold more matches over time. So that size of that box is kind of your aerobic base. How many matches you have in that box you could think of as like your anaerobic work, right? So every time heart rate spikes, big push, can't get up a hill, gets stuck, whatever it is, you take a match out and you burn it. When you don't have a big box or the structure is not great, and you only got a couple matches in there, you're going to do that 3 or 4 times and then you're done. Like there's not much coming back from that. Not to say you can't keep going, but from like an enjoyment and competitive and not getting hurt perspective,
Right.
You're close, right?
Right.
Now, if you train all those systems, you have a big box, durable structure, and you have a bunch of matches in there, you have so much more room to go out and burn those things and recover in between efforts. And so the the time that you're out there gives you, I mean, so the nice thing about racing, for the most part, you have a good general idea of what you need to do. And so
Right.
you can always look at those time domains and just work backwards. Whereas,
Right.
some things are a lot more vague, and
Hmm.
I still think the general rules stay the same. Do some anaerobic work, do aerobic work, and strength train. But
Hmm.
it can be a little bit harder sometimes, if there's not a specific event or goal in mind. And so
Right.
I think I like the races for structure. It's totally training doesn't, you don't have to have an event or race to want to get better. But then it's the general preparation mindset, right? I want to
Hmm.
stay fit year round. I want to be able to come off the couch, have a good weekend riding, not be crushed for a couple of days. When I'm out there, I want to enjoy it. I don't want to just feel like it's a sucker fest and can't wait to get back to the truck. But then 2 days later, you go, oh, that was actually pretty fun.
Hmm.
Actually enjoy it in the moment.
Right.
Um, yeah, and that's where the off the bike training, I think, is so valuable.
Right. Yeah, and like we talked about, the off the bike training is um, so much less expensive on so many fronts, energetically, time wise, parts and gas for the bike, all those things make it a real bargain compared to riding the bike. And if you're disciplined enough to say, okay, I know I need to do this to ride better. I can't just keep riding like I was a teenager. I've got to enforce a little more self-discipline. Then I can really see where that would help. For some of my friends or people that don't understand, I think you said it, ventilatory threshold and things like that. How would you describe training on, say, an assault bike? How would you feel? What would you be noticing if you're in that zone 2?
Yeah, so zone two should be actually fairly easy. And
Mm-hmm.
that's where a lot of people actually go wrong, because you almost feel like you're not working hard enough.
Mm-hmm.
So then you take it up a little bit, and you take it up a little bit, and then you're passing into zone 3 or 4. And well, most people probably won't go into zone 4 because that's just get really hard. So
Mm-hmm.
a lot of people hang out in the zone 3, which in and of itself is not a bad thing, but you're kind of losing the adaptations you're looking for from zone 2. So zone 2 would be, if you've ever done like a blood lactate test, like it'd be where your lactate starts to build up in the bloodstream. And once you
Right.
pass a certain point, you're essentially switching from primarily burning fats as fuel into pulling more sugars.
Mm-hmm.
One of the ideas with the zone 2, you want to build out mitochondrial density, capillary distribution, so more blood flow throughout broader range of muscle and all that stuff, right? Better distribution. But it also is you're primarily burning fat as fuel, right? So you're getting more efficient as using fat instead of always pulling sugars. And so once you start to cross that border, right, you're just missing on kind of some of the adaptation you're looking for. One, there's what's the equation? I think it's 40 minus your, 180 minus your age, right?
Right.
Puts you at a pretty good heart rate zone for zone 2.
Yeah. And I've heard that also where like you can have a conversation
Yep.
in zone 2, and you could even breathe just through your nose in zone
That's the
2.
other one that I love. Like
Yeah.
just do nasal breathing, and that'll
Mm-hmm.
keep you in zone 2. The other good part, we do actually with our gym here in Driggs, we do this a lot. Like I do as much as I think people will actually continue to enjoy.
And keep
Um,
coming back.
yeah, but we'll do blocks where once a week we do a 40-minute mixed modal, so like CrossFit style workout with nasal breathing only.
Mm.
um got some pushback in the beginning, and then now there's obviously some people are like, this is stupid and I'm not going to do it, I'm going to breathe out, and that's totally fine. But I bet there's probably a 75 to 80% buy-in at this point.
Mm-hmm.
It does a lot of great things. It keeps your heart rate down. You feel like you're working really hard, so you get that mental tick, right? You kind of can check that box. It's not like you felt like you came in and just walked for 40 minutes. You get all the benefits from the nasal breathing aspect, and you're staying aerobic, right?
Right.
So I love it. I've played around with it riding. I'm trying to find a pair of goggles that doesn't like literally pinch my nose, and I'm blessed with like oily skin, and so those those strips like do not stay on, because otherwise I'd put those nasal strips on trying to open
Yeah.
them. But I think nasal breathing motos, not motos, maybe longer, lower intensity, right? Again, if you use the nasal breathing as your guide, like literally go as fast as you can while only breathing through your nose. But as soon as you peak, you better slow down and bring that heart rate back down so you can keep doing it, right? That's kind of what you need to learn.
And that's what I've read also is, that's why the assault bike is so great, because even if you're on a road bicycle and you're training, let alone a dirt bike, it's really hard to stay steady in that zone 2, because the terrain changes, something changes. So it's really hard to stay steady in it. And then sure enough, we're up into zone 3 again. And so doing it on a bike is really challenging, but an assault bike in the gym, you can maintain that for a long time, as long as your brain can handle just sitting there, in zone 2.
Yeah.
And that mental toughness, I think you've talked about that before, is so important. I think you said you spend like 4 hours on the assault bike in zone 2 sometimes. Yeah.
I've done a couple long gym buildups for, well, particularly for King of Motos, because it's the first race, right? And but more or less from now until then, I can't get on the bike unless we go down south. So I'll suffer it out on the ergs, and I rotate through them because it's really miserable. Like I've done a multiple 60-minute max calorie road tests, and if I have my way, I'll break that up into 3 or 4 different things where I'm not stopping for that same time, but I'm rotate. I'll do, 5 minutes on the skier, 5 minutes on a assault bike, 5 minutes on the rower, 5 minutes step ups, and go through that for an hour or 2 or whatever. And it's a good way to break up the monotony. And you can do that in any way you want. There's no set pattern on any of this stuff that's like, this is the only way to do it.
Right.
More thinking of it in line with what the goal of the session is. So if I want it to be aerobic, everything has to be repeatable for the duration that you're doing. Like if you can just figure that principle out, you can go a long ways with training. You can go through the threshold work all the way to zone 2. A lot of times what happens is, and this is probably the biggest thing with racing, I think too, is everybody blows their wad in the first 30 minutes. There's no attempt or knowledge or awareness around sustainability in that. And I mean, part of it makes sense because you got to go really hard in the first 10 minutes to try and get in front of some bottlenecks and all that stuff.
Right.
Then the perception of that 4 hours is that remembrance of the first, what it felt like in the first 20 minutes, when usually it slows down to a snail's pace.
Right.
And you're sitting in bottlenecks and literally just hanging out, and you're doing this thing, and people look at heart rates on average, average 190 for 4 hours. Like, no, you didn't. Like your heart rate monitor doesn't work correctly. The data is not right. There's absolutely no way. For 4 hours, you average 190.
Right.
20 minutes supercross, different.
Right.
4 hour plus hard enduro, no. So there's like that myth of like what it felt like and what it thought the outcome was, and then like the reality in between. So figuring out when you're in a gym session, like say even a 20-minute CrossFit AMRAP, right? So it's many rounds as possible, and let's say it's 10 kettlebell swings, 5 strict pull up, 20 box step up, like something super simple. How do you make that repeatable? How can you make that like threshold work, and how do you make that aerobic work? You could have the same workout one way, do that workout, nose breathing only. That's going to
Right.
keep you aerobic. If you're in good enough shape to be able to pursue something like that, when you finish round one, you look at the clock, say it took you 90 seconds. You should have every single split of that throughout the 20 minutes should be 90 seconds, right?
Right.
If you fall off in there, let's say you start at 90 seconds per round and you finish at 2 minutes per round. That's not terrible, but let's say you finish at 2.5 minutes per round. So now you're having to rest. Could be many reasons for this. Your kettlebell swing could be too heavy for your fitness level.
Mm-hmm.
You could be not great shape. So that's just something you can't repeat. You could have
Mm-hmm.
gone
The
out.
box could be too high.
Yep, box could be too high. Your aerobic base just isn't there yet, so you can't turn that over. You could have gone out too fast on your first round. Not realistic, right? You could have sprinted that first one instead of just going at a pace like, hey, in 5 minutes, I'm going to feel a little bit more tired. Maybe I should just walk between exercises instead of like real aggressive, between. Because again, the goal is the sustainability part.
Right.
So if you did that same workout every week, you would be able to figure out what you can do, like how much effort you can put into each exercise. Maybe you're not pulling the kettlebell back down to speed up. You're letting gravity pull it down. Good hip drive up, step up at a steady pace. You're not trying to sprint those things out because at 20 minutes, you want that split to be the same. And then over time, you're able to be at like 93 seconds, 92 seconds, 94 seconds, all the way through that 20 minutes. That's pretty awesome, right? And that's a great way to kind of self-check on all these things. If you're doing the same thing on the assault bike and you want to work some anaerobic intervals, and anaerobic by definition is unsustainable, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you do 3 minutes as hard as you can on the assault bike, you rest 10 minutes and you do that again as hard as you can. If those two scores are the same, you didn't go hard enough on your first one. Like you literally, now when you're training it, you want to try and make them repeatable. But if you really went as hard as you could, you would not be able to repeat that effort. To get people to go as hard as you can is very hard to do.
Right.
And usually endurance-minded athletes, and this isn't like a disparaging toward them, but they're usually a lot harder to get to go 100%. Typically power sport or sprint athletes can go 100%, and it's harder for them to actually keep stuff in reserve for longer efforts, right? That's kind of that flip side of the mentality.
Right. So what I understand is you need to develop a big base in zone 2 before getting it into the anaerobic work. Meaning that from what I understand is, say it's this time of year and you're a guy like me. And so I'm going to spend 6 weeks developing that zone 2 so that come January, I'm ready to start moving into that anaerobic work, because what I understand is it's much harder to get to that anaerobic and to push yourself without having that base. Would you agree with that? Or
yeah, I would put it this way: it takes longer to build up a good aerobic base and strength base than it does the anaerobic capacity.
okay.
The anaerobic capacity can spool up much faster.
Okay.
So exactly that. Like if you're the further away out from your event you are, the less specific you should be to that event. Right. So if you got 4 months, let's say just on average, spend the first 2 months strength training, longer slow distance, zone 2 work. That's going to give you a great base. And then at 2 months out, 8 weeks roughly, start very sport specific and diving in.
Right.
And that's going to be short, fast interval work, longer duration interval work, and then longer ride or whatever erg stuff.
Right.
Um,
So one way you could do that zone 2 work, like we were talking about doing just nose breathing, is put tape over your mouth, couldn't you? And just self-enforce it that way.
Yep.
It would suck, but you could do it and it would work.
Yeah, I think what was that Patrick McCallan's book, The Oxygen Advantage?
Right.
I think he suggested the tape, right?
I think so, yeah. And
I
I've
was
seen like
very,
mouthpieces or something that guys wear so that you can only let so much air in. And so
yeah,
you're depriving yourself of oxygen too, if you really want to be sadistic.
you know, there's an airwave, I think was one.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, never played around with that stuff. I could be disciplined about the nose breathing thing. Another one, this is kind of fun. I think this was actually in Spartan Notebook. Uh, the dude that created the Spartan races.
Okay.
Sorry, I'm blanking on his name. But one of his challenges was put water in your mouth and run 10 miles.
Oh yeah, I've heard that before. And then see how
Yeah.
much you can spit out afterwards.
Yeah, totally. We did it at the gym for just a mile one. It was like a Saturday workout, kind of a more fun days. And I was like, okay, we're gonna do this. So take a little cup, a little Dixie cup, like a shot, put it in your mouth. I want you when you come back from the mile, you got to spit it back in the thing. And this was like the beginning of our nasal breathing stuff. And I remember being like, no, don't go hard. Like literally walk to the corner and then maybe start jogging, see how you feel, like let everything catch up, right? And one of our ladies who's just an animal, but she just took off sprinting, right? And at the corner, I'm watching her go around the corner and she's already spitting the water out. I'm like, um, yeah, I think as a rule of thumb, using that as a guide and then, remembering how it feels and going from there.
Mm-hmm. And
Zone
then
two,
that next
three.
level, um, getting into zone 3, isn't it where it's hard to have a conversation now? And that's where you're starting to train that zone 3.
Yeah, you're gonna start breaking it up.
Mm-hmm.
You could get maybe a part of a conversation out, but then you're gonna have to breathe in between.
Mm-hmm.
Zone four, it's gonna be words.
Mm-hmm.
Zone five, if you're talking, you're doing it wrong.
Right. Yep. Now, as far as I'm thinking, like an interesting split would be like training guys under 50 and training guys over 50. Like when I was 52, I could still go out with the running club and do 8 miles, and it wasn't that big a deal. Slowly since then, it's gotten harder and harder. And it seems like from what I read, also the physiological changes that happen after 50 um, changes a little bit how you train. And how would you address that kind of situation?
I think there's a mindset shift as well from maybe building to maintaining.
Okay.
That's important. It's just harder. Like
Mm-hmm.
you need more of the resources pointed in the right direction. And typically life's could be less complicated, but probably not. So lifestyle factors play a part, stress levels, sleep, all those things are massive, nutrition. Um, I think focusing on strength is big. And I would say keeping the cardio up that doesn't beat you up and
Mm-hmm.
probably doing less high intensity stuff, but still doing some.
Right.
So I know for me, like even I'm 42 going on 43 this year. I know a difference. I feel a difference from how I recover from the short fast stuff. Like that's where the gym is so nice from
Mm-hmm.
the high intensity work. Like I'm not talking about CrossFit metcons. I'm talking about
Right.
staying on the erg, like a ski erg, a row, salt bike, concept two bike erg, or whatever, right? Not
Mm-hmm.
elliptical. I don't know how much those things do, but anything else, treadmill even, running outside if that doesn't beat you up, but doing those things for high intensity, I feel way better.
Yeah, I find that the guys that I train that are over 50, what I keep emphasizing is dosage. Getting the dosage right is so challenging as we get older, because when I was younger, I could go out and run 8 miles off the couch and it'd be like, it'd be okay. And now, that would be nearly catastrophic. But if you can slowly increase and having that self-discipline increase a little bit, and seeing your season as, okay, if I want to ride well next May, I got to be training now. Whereas when I was younger, it was like I could start training in March and be fine. Well, now I see it, I need to develop that base year round and maintain that base year round. And then, like you were saying, up the anaerobic work and the sprints and the intervals and things like that as the event gets closer.
Right.
So yeah, dosage is huge.
Yeah, dosage, and then doing doing that dose at the right intensity is massive, because and this, going back to the flywheel bike, I think if I were to just have one piece of equipment, I'd probably fluctuated on this, but at this point I'm kind of leaning toward the assault bike.
Right. You've mentioned that before in your podcast, right?
Yeah, I think it's hard to beat, because you get, like, there is some aspect of you improve, well, not some, it's very true, you improve in the range that you trained, right? From an endurance standpoint, a lot of the cyclical stuff is lower body specific, minus the skier. But if you have a skier, then you're not doing lower body. So if you can run and you have a skier, that's a pretty good combination. The stationary bikes are super efficient in space and low barrier to entry. It's easy to just sit in there and start spinning. But the assault bike, with the combination of the upper body push pull, the leg push, it's great. It's miserable to be on for 30 minutes. Even going easy, like that's my biggest hang up with it, is just, it sucks to sit on for, it's great for the hard, fast interval stuff. It's definitely harder to get on if you're like, I'm going to do this for 60 minutes. Like, I'd rather go sit on a Concept 2 biker. I can put an iPad up or computer even, and work or scroll or podcast or whatever. And you can podcast on the other one, but yeah, it's just easier. The assault bike, I had to do these 30-30 protocols for 33 minutes back when I was training up CrossFit, and it was 30 seconds at 85%, 30 seconds at 50%. So pretty hard effort, easy spin for 33 minutes, no break. And I would go into those things and I'd be like, all right, I'll do 10 minutes. Then I get to 10 minutes and go, all right, I'll go to 15. And I get to 15 and go, all right, I'll go to 20. Anyways, just worked my way through it. Just broke it down into small chunks. And then I think I had to do it every week for like 8 weeks. And right after that was 12 rounds of 500-meter row at threshold, 90-second rest. So a miserable, like unenjoyable hour and a half cardio, at a painful level. But it worked. But the assault bike, being on there, just, with the arms and legs, and yeah, there's no rest.
Right. Now, it seems like a lot of older riders over 50 have accumulated a number of injuries throughout their athletic careers, whether it be on dirt bikes or, other sports that they've done. And what advice could you give on working around those injuries?
Yeah. Obviously it's very specific to the injury, but at some point there's kind of two choices, right? There's either figuring out a way to work around it and make it work, or giving up on it entirely. So it's obviously going to limit exercise selection, but typically there's a workaround that is available. There's definitely a difference from like short-term injury, whether that's through surgery or something that you happen, it'll get better in a couple weeks or months through PT and stuff like that, and like a long-term issue that, hey, I can't do this, right? In the short term, it's not an excuse not to train, like literally. I think that's usually what it becomes. And in the long term, I think it's similar, right? I think you just got to figure out what you can do and continue.
Find the workarounds, and usually it's talking to an expert to figure out what that is.
Totally.
Sometimes it's not as apparent to the person doing the training, but if you talk to an experienced trainer or a physician or something that's very well versed in fitness, you can usually find a workaround that does somewhat of the same things without stressing it too much. And then it seems like often you can go back to it. It's just you have to drop so low that it's incomprehensible for people, to decrease that dosage so low that people can't even believe it. and then slowly build back up again. And sometimes it seems like it's doing exercise that's difficult, but just simply dropping the dosage and the reps and the weight so low that it becomes incredibly easy, and then slowly building up again. And that can actually be the therapy, and it actually makes it feel better.
Right. Yeah. I mean, one of the more common is low backs, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I've had back issues. Dane's had back issues. I feel like everybody at some point has had some kind of back issue.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think there's one there. Well, they're so complex. Pain in general is so complex. Like people who
Mm-hmm.
go, oh, well, this is your problem. It's like, probably not.
Mm-hmm.
But mindset's massive in all this stuff. Um, for me, it was actually breathing, learning to breathe
Mm-hmm.
better, which I think
Right.
helped me get out of it. I don't know exactly what caused it in the beginning. I know when it happened for my back, but I was 3 years of sciatica into my right heel. Never had like a foot drop or anything, but painful. Couldn't every morning. Getting in a truck, like I couldn't pull my head down and look at my feet.
Yeah.
Just thing. But during that time, I competed for 3 years at a high level in CrossFit, pulled the heaviest deadlift I've ever pulled, cleaned the most amount of weight I've ever cleaned. Like all during this time when,
Mm.
constant pain. And I would, it would flare up sometimes and I couldn't lift and do something else. But then other times it was better. But dealing with that, but coming out of it was a shift toward learning to breathe correctly, which everybody breathes. So I didn't think that was that important. And I was like, of course I can breathe. Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
But learning more a little bit, diaphragmatic breathing and doing a bunch of drills. And I think that just kind of set me up to then make the jump pain free. And I haven't had
Mm-hmm.
sciatica since.
Right.
Every now and then, still a little low back stuff, but nothing
Mm-hmm.
major. Dane was something similar. Um, but during that time, like, what was the alternative? Just not do anything?
Right.
Guarantee I would have been worse off. I would have got weaker, would have felt worse, would have created these. Like, how important is the mind aspect in pain, and like what
Huge.
you're willing to give the pain,
Huge. Yes.
like
I've
direct how
been,
you live your life.
yeah. I can tell you from experience, the work I've done with chronic pain as a chiropractor for 35 years, pain is, now they describe it as a biopsychosocial phenomenon. So there's physiological things that are going on.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely, you have swelling, you have inflammation, you may have some discs that are torn or whatever. You have psychological things going on, because if it changes your psychology and you get a little more attention because you're in pain, or your upbringing said that pain was something that you just take it easy and rest on, and you get a lot of help with, that influences you. There's the social part. If pain can really be socially isolating, in that it doesn't allow you to do the things you want to do. You'd be like, well, yeah, I'd love to go dirt biking with my friends, but my back hurts. And then, well, that was your social outlet. And now you don't have that. So your world keeps getting smaller and smaller the more pain influences you. And then whatever the brain does, it just gets better at. So if it feels pain, it just makes more connections to different parts of the brain to cause that pain and to experience that pain. My personal story is, I had a car accident in 2017 and rolled the car down the highway at 70 miles an hour sideways, and then went right back to endurance bicycling, where I'd ride, a couple hundred miles on a day on a bicycle on the road. And I started experiencing incredible upper back pain. Well, the discs in the neck refer into the upper back, and that kept going on until then. Now it was like carrying a backpack was painful, and it was carrying a light backpack was painful.
Mm-hmm.
And then it was, it was just painful all the time. And then I had a Toyota truck that was, lifted, and I'd go four-wheeling on it. It was hurt to even drive it to work. And I'm like, dang, something's going on here. And I subscribed to this app called Curable, which deals with chronic regional pain syndrome. And I did their 12-week course. And I was watching this one video, and this researcher from University of Michigan was talking about a Vietnam vet that he worked with who was shot in the leg, and it had healed, didn't have any problems until he heard a helicopter. And then he just had excruciating pain. And something snapped in my brain and just said, the chassis on your truck is the same chassis as the car that you rolled down the highway. And your subconscious is trying to protect you from that happening again. You know, consciously, I thought I was done with it, but subconsciously, my brain was saying, like, you're in a life-threatening situation here. So after that, I went driving in my truck, and I could just feel my neck tightening up, and I could feel it just cracking and popping. And I was just like, you know, this is just a neurological fluke, and you're going to get through it. And within a week, I could drive the truck anywhere. And that's when I started dirt biking again, because it was like, I know that it was a psychological subconscious thing that my body was and brain was trying to protect me from another injury. And once I was able to move that to the prefrontal cortex and away from the limbic system, it was like, okay, I can control that, and I have some agency over that. And now, you know, if I ride a lot, my neck is sore. If I fall and I hit my head, my neck is sore, but it's like, it's kind of bearable. And so that just points to the fact of how it's a biopsychosocial phenomenon. And we don't, and just like you worked through it and said, like, this isn't something that has to disable me. I need to keep going and keep doing my workouts, and eventually it gets better. But not many people have that kind of fortitude.
Yeah, I think I don't know, Jordan Peterson's talked a lot obviously about this stuff, but one of those things was, you know, the avoidance of well, anything you fear, right? It's not, the way to get better is not to avoid it entirely. It's to incrementally face it, right? In a way that you are able to show up and perform, and then increase that over time. And it speaks to that exactly. Like, I know when Dane in Billings, when she had her side cut open, that foot peg, I don't know if you ever saw photos of that.
I didn't see it, but I remember that in the podcast. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, it took her, you know, some time of getting comfortable. And even now she'll still talk about it. We're on a side hill or a position where maybe the terrain's a little slippery or a little bit more exposed, right? Those things will start to pop back up, and it's gotten so much better, and she keeps pushing through. And every time she does, she feels like she's made this other step, you know. But it's exactly that. It's like, if you never went back out there and showed up and put yourself in those positions, that would now have control over what you do, right?
Right.
On some level.
In all parts of your life, not just in your riding, but in all parts. Right. Yeah. And one of my next questions was based on that, you know, how do you train mental toughness? Because that's a big part of enduros. And I know you've talked about really long assault bike rides and things like that, but any other tips?
Yeah, I think this is a hard one. It's so simple, and it's complex at the same time. It's literally doing all the shit you don't want to do. Like, honestly, and it's not something that, like, once you have it, you just have it. It's like every single freaking day, you have to put forward mental toughness. Like, I could have it today and then gone tomorrow and just nothing, or feel like there's nothing there, right? And maybe you do so bad the next day that you've shamed yourself into better performance the day after, instead of, yeah, it's literally doing all the shit you know you're supposed to do that you don't do.
Right.
And over time, that it does get easier to do those things, but I don't think it ever goes away. I mean, you can listen to somebody like Goggins, or David Goggins, who's just crazy, right? Mentally tough, but he'll talk about times where he stared at his shoes for 30 minutes and talked to himself about putting them on to go run. And most of us would look to him and be like, this guy has no problem doing hard stuff, but he still has to talk himself into it. So I don't think it's ever anything that you just have or don't have. I think it's something you're just constantly focusing on and working
and maybe building over time, just like your aerobic base. You know, you may drop off sometimes, but if you did it before, getting back to it is going to be easier. Yeah.
Yes, for sure. I do. Yeah. I think the more patterns you build in that, the more pathways are easier to get back into. Uh,
Hmm.
and maybe the shorter, for myself, that's something I'm really good at, doing something for a specific event
Hmm.
or a race, or if I have a deadline,
Right.
I can do that. I'm actually way worse off when I'm adrift between things.
Hmm.
And if it's far enough out, it's very easy to be like, yeah, I'm good.
Right. Right.
But I felt like over the years, those periods in between are just a little bit shorter. So
Right.
instead of maybe, for instance, um, even when I was competing at CrossFit, and I more or less quit drinking entirely, but
Hmm.
I used to like to drink,
Hmm.
and I would drink through 6 months of training, which it wasn't like I never really drank during the week, but weekends go pretty big for a couple days.
Hmm.
But even that was detrimental in a massive sense, from nutrition, recovery, sleep, body composition. But I could still do that, get away with it. And then as soon as I would need to start really buckling down for the open,
Hmm.
I would cut it out entirely. And then I would not drink through performance of CrossFit, however far I made it.
Hmm.
And then I'd kind of start back up again. And it was this like
Hmm.
pattern. But then over time, I was able to cut that window down. And finally, it was just something I had to look at and be like, for riding it
Why?
became, yeah. And it became, for me at least at the time, like we'd go out and ride, and it wasn't really racing or anything, but we'd go for weekend camp trips, and I'd spend half the time thinking about getting back to the truck so I could drink a beer instead of like being out there. Like we're doing everything possible, spending all this money, traveling all this time to go do the thing we want to do the most. And I'm doing it and I'm thinking about something else.
Right.
Yeah. So I had to look at that. And for me, it was just a better decision. Um, but yeah, the mental thing, I don't think ever goes away.
Hmm. And I
And
think I can say for me, that's why I ride, is because it's the hardest thing I've ever done, is physically and emotionally and mentally, and learning a new skill. It's the hardest thing I've ever done. And I've done a lot of hard things, but to day in and day out live like, okay, how do I going to get better? How important is it to me to get better? And not because like I'm going to be some pro enduro racer at 65 years old or something, but it's just that test of yourself. And each time you ride the same section, a month apart, and you notice an improvement, it's like, hey, I'm a little better, I'm a little faster, I'm a little smoother. Every time you go to the gym and it's like, okay, I'm a little bit stronger, I'm a little bit more efficient today. um, that's what kind of keeps me going, is that challenge, and saying like, yeah, I did really good this week, well, but this week I didn't do very well, and mentally I slipped a little bit, nutrition I slipped a little bit, and now how do I get back on the horse and keep making improvements and making gains? Because it's a great test, and I mean, that's the only reason I would race, is because it points to right where your weaknesses are.
right.
Just going out for a ride with friends, you kind of see where your weaknesses are. But when you race, it's like, oh yeah, that aerobic base that Josh was talking about, that really sucked. That's what I got to go back and work on.
Right.
Right.
And that's where the gym can be so useful too, because you're getting immediate feedback on everything, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know how much weight you're lifting for how many reps, you know what pace you're able to hold on the erg, whether you're off from last week or not. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and to me, that's one of the things that is such a valuable check-in. And going back to the mental fitness thing, it's like you could do the same workout and have a totally different experience from a challenge level. But if done correctly, every week you're going to try and increase in weight for whatever the reps and rounds are called out for. And there's going to be periods of time where that's not possible, which
Mm-hmm.
is totally fine. Um, on the ergs, you're always trying to increase your speed, right? Hold a faster
Mm-hmm.
pace, this and that. And if you're not doing those things, at some point you're going to quit improving. Um, I think the enduro stuff, or the dirt bike in general, is challenging a little bit, on the sense that the sport is not the gym. So on some level, like I've been asked it so many times, like, what are some standards and, you know, this and that for dirt bikes? I'm like, well, I'm hesitant to put those things out because like the sport's not the gym, right? You want to use it as a tool, make the improvements we can, get stronger, strong enough, and then transfer that over. And it's like, if you were to take the top 10 just hard enduro riders and put them through a gym test, like, no disrespect to Eva, but the numbers would be pretty not great from a gym perspective. It'd be like very, I would almost say below average from like what you'll typically see is people say, okay, this is like moderate, this is strong, this is advanced, this is elite. You're down in that low end, right? So how important is it to be, you know, a bench press or a squat? It's like, well, strong enough, right? Strong enough for you to do the thing you love to do without and get that the strength to prevent injury and increase recovery, because the stronger you are, the faster you are going to recover up to a point. Yeah, it's a hard number and standards to throw out there.
Yeah, which brings me to the next question. You know, you've trained some great riders, and what makes the difference between those great riders and your average rider? You know, the physical, mental, the work ethic, the experience. What would you say there?
They show up.
They show up
all the time for everything. They do their training, the workouts in the gym, they do the workouts on the bike, they do more skill work and drills on the bike. Yeah, they live and breathe it more or less. I think the main, so years ago, Dana and I went and did a Dusty Abbott like Christmas camp thing. I think it was like 18 or 19. And I remember, like, I'm coming from, I had done a couple races at this point. I think I did Idaho City 100 for 2 years. And I'd done one hard enduro race. I think it was Enduro Fest in Reno, Nevada. And other than that, trail ride. That's it. Trail ride around here. We'd go big trips, you know, spend 4 or 5 hours. So 60 to 100-mile days, single track. That was it. Never went back and did a log twice. Got over that sucker and moved on, right? Paddled, pushed, fell over, didn't matter. Next thing. And we were sitting there, and Destry and Cooper were there, and they were kind of, I think we went out to like Cooper's kind of practice area for hard enduro and some turn tracks out there in the desert. And I remember going, where do you go like trail ride? Like, where do you could do all this in like an hour. Where else do you go? He's like, go where? Like, come out here and train. I'm like, wait, you just ride the same thing over and over and over and over and over, day after day for years on end? I was like, what's the longest trail ride you've ever done? He's like, I don't know, 20 miles. And I'm like, huh. I just started thinking about that. It was like the first time that I'd heard someone at Cooper. Well, I didn't really know anybody, but like listening to Cooper talk about how he trained for riding was just, I had no even idea what that looked like.
Right.
You know, and maybe it wasn't 20 miles. I'm not trying to, I don't remember what it was exactly, but it was just so different from kind of the world that I was coming from.
Right.
Where it's like, no, you find something and you do it over and over and over and over and over until it's perfected or as close as you can get, right? Then you do it some more, and then you keep doing that year after year. And you always have this reference because you know the track, and sure, it changes a little bit. Some things get easier, some get harder, but you always have this reference point. And the other side of that is like, you just go out and you do this thing one time, and maybe it's the same trail, but intensity is different, duration's different, intent's different. Yeah, and you're not actually working the hardest parts of that trail are not getting done over and over and over and over. You're doing it a couple times a year as much
as you're trying to survive it, so that
totally,
because if you do the same section, it's the same difficult section. It's like, well, then will I have enough to finish?
right?
You know, because this ride may go on for several hours, and I got to get through this 5-minute part. And if I keep repeating it, then I may not have the energy to finish later on. That's the thinking I usually end up with.
Well,
Whereas
and
often I say the really rocky parts, like I should go back and do this, but my friends are like, "Oh, we're going, got another 20 miles." It's like,
right,
I really
right.
like to go back and improve that one section.
Totally. And how far away from the truck is it as far as if you break apart or yourself, right?
Yeah.
All that stuff matters. I mean, practicing the hardest part of a trail when that part is, a good 4 or 5 miles plus, 10 miles plus into grizzly country is not always the best freaking option if you have to walk out.
Right. Well, you know, I was noticing, to kind of wrap it up, that, if you look at social media on YouTube or, anything to do with dirt bikes, it's like the reviews of the doodads, get about 400% more views than rider fitness posts. So everybody wants to buy, the latest doodad for their bike, but you look at the ones on like the posts that you guys do and some other people, a few people that are doing, motocross fitness, and it's like they'll get like 1,000 views. Where if you come out with a new pipe for your bike and you review it, it gets like 4,000 views, and it's just
Yeah.
amazing to me that there's that discrepancy.
Yeah. I don't know. I do find it interesting that the most important things in life you can't buy,
Mm-hmm.
right? Can't buy
Mm-hmm.
health for the most part. You can
Mm-hmm.
buy things that might help you. You can't buy fitness. Like you got
Mm-hmm.
to do the work.
Yep.
Same with skills on a dirt bike. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, not to say those things don't make some difference,
Mm-hmm.
but not near what they're paid for.
Right.
I mean, what tires, tire pressure, at least for
Mm-hmm.
hard enduro, probably the biggest thing out there. From
Mm-hmm.
there, you could talk maybe gearing and suspension at some level, but like tires, tire pressure,
Mm-hmm.
making the bike comfortable for you. But yeah, you put the best riders on any bike, and it's not the bike, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, it's pretty funny. I
And
think
what
it's
what
easy,
things have you
flashy.
done that made the most improvements in your riding? Because you and Dane haven't been riding for that long. I think you said like 2019 or something, but you've thrown up some great finishes, and maybe coming into it from a CrossFit, mentality of, that kind of work ethic. Anything else you can think of?
Yeah, I think definitely haven't. I mean, I'm also tall, which helps for sure
Mm-hmm.
in the
How tall are you?
hard enduro, 6'4".
Okay.
But I'm also heavy for that. Like I'm down to 205, which I'm pretty happy with. I was at 225, 230 for a long time. So just carrying
Mm-hmm.
more muscle mass, probably a little fat
Mm-hmm.
mass too. And I just didn't need it, and trying to slim it down a little bit. I'm probably happy with around 200, 205. So
Mm-hmm.
coming from that, yeah, the strength has never been an issue. CrossFit for the most part is not super long endurance.
Mm-hmm.
It's endurance in a way, but it's a lot of threshold work and then anaerobic work.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't have the aerobic base that,
Mm-hmm.
coming from like more an endurance side. So learning to build that, being patient with that stuff too is a challenge. I think the biggest difference for me was talking to more and more and learning from what the best riders are doing. And
Mm-hmm.
then like just being super curious and putting that stuff into practice has made the biggest difference. Trials bike, I would also say from a skill perspective, has made a massive difference. Um, we've again, our riding season's short, so like I'd like to figure that out to where we can get down to the desert or somewhere to ride for at least a couple months during the winter,
Mm-hmm.
but also accepting that and not just letting that be an excuse. So then turning that drive into conditioning work, because I can do that. So then I know even if I'm going to pick my skills up at the same point I left them off from November to the beginning of the season next year, at least I can go into it in the best shape possible. And that's
Right.
going to make up for a lot. Because I do, not to go too far down this, but there is a sense like the better at riding you get, the less in shape you become. So the more efficient you are. So unless you're pushing the terrain and difficulty of level or speed that you're riding, along with the efficiency that you're gaining, you're at best case staying in the same shape fitness wise.
Right.
Because in the beginning, like you go out for a ride an hour and you're wrecked because you're picking your bike up all the time. Your heart rate's through the roof. You're holding on.
That's me,
man.
Yeah.
But as that becomes easier, you go do that same ride, you're not as tired.
Right.
So unless you're doing it faster, changing up in the harder terrain and constantly pushing in that sense, you're actually detraining fitness wise. So making sure that you're staying on top of the fitness side of that while you're making the improvements on the bike. And that's where you start to see these people who are just making these massive jumps year to year, right? They're ticking all the boxes. They're getting better skill work. They're practicing the fundamentals over and over and over. I think it was Steve Hatch on a podcast said it's amateurs do something until they can do it once, and the pros do it till they can't do it wrong.
Right.
More or less.
Yeah.
And it makes so much sense, right? Because even for me on a trials bike, I'll finally get a line and no dabs and do it. I'm like, cool, done with that. And I'm like, nope. I just got to keep hitting this week after week until it's like automatic, and maybe never 1,000 times clean, but you know, a bunch of times in a row where you're like, okay, I got this pretty good.
Right. Yeah. It's funny you bring up Steve Hatch. My father and his father used to race sports cars together on the vintage series. And we grew up within 10 miles of each other, but never met.
Oh, really?
So hopefully someday I'll go back to visit my parents and ride with them. So
yeah,
he's just down the road from my parents' house.
Oh,
and then
nice.
to wrap it up, you know, from a C-level rider point of view, you know, heading into the off season, what are the three most important things, you know, that I should keep in mind in preparing for next year?
Yeah. Fundamentals on as far as skill work, I would say would pay the biggest dividends. Some long rides for sure, like all that stuff. But I think keeping up on the skill work during the week or as often as possible. And then from the gym side of things, that's where you can get the fitness in without the big impactful, you know, getting beat up and feeling like you need a couple of days off kind of thing. Right. So you can use the gym as the fitness tool, use the skill work on the bike to just build that base, right? And then, you know, put it all together, or whatever you want to call it, on your weekend rides kind of thing.
Yeah. You've answered all my questions. That's awesome.
Probably missed some in some roundabout ways, but yeah.
I'd love to do talk some more about the different energy systems and things and training those. I think there's a lot of confusion for people around those, and you know, that's the basis of what we're training for, the science of it, and how much of the science is important to know. I guess that depends on the individual. I'm kind of a science guy, and I love to learn exercise physiology and how it relates to each sport, but that would be very interesting also.
Yeah, I've found I would say I like to know why, but at some point there's a very distinct point where my interest has been answered, and then the rabbit hole goes down for another 5 years. Right. And I check out. I'm like, I don't care. I've learned enough to understand it, and I can apply it, and it makes sense, and then I'm good.
That's what's important.
Yeah. Because it is funny, because I've thought a lot of, I mean, I went hard in the energy system stuff for a long time. Not a long time, but long enough. And yeah, Dr. Andy Galpin, I don't know if you've ever heard that name. Yeah. On his website, actually, it's free YouTube videos. It's just easiest to find it through that.
Yeah, he was interviewed on the Huberman podcast also, right?
Yeah, they did like a 5-part series.
Yeah.
And Andy's amazing, because Andy can go all the way down to the bottom and he'll still tell you he's learning about it. Right. And then you can break it down in the simplest way possible.
Right.
So I've gone a little bit past the simplest way possible. But his videos are fantastic for those
Okay.
people that are interested in, like, he has a 5 minute, 25 minute, and 55 minute on the same topic
Hmm.
of each thing. Um, yeah, you could, people spend their whole lifetimes doing it, but
Right.
enough to get it, glean it, figure it out, put it in an application. And I think some of this stuff too is like people want to know too much to get started.
Right. Right.
And that's an excuse not to start.
Analysis by paralysis
Totally.
by analysis. Right. Yeah.
I think of that with people, like even with some like a squat.
Hmm.
Like, you're gonna learn more by starting to squat
Hmm.
than you ever will by continuing to watch YouTube videos on it.
Right.
And if you want to know even more, just film yourself. Do 10.
Hmm.
Put your phone up. Do something from the front, something from the side. Watch it. Maybe compare it to something. Go do some
Hmm.
more.
Right.
Load it from the front, load it from the back, load it from, Zercher from the elbows. Like, just start doing it and do it light enough you're not going to hurt yourself. But go do
Right.
it. Same with the fitness. I don't know what zone 2 is. I need a heart rate monitor. No, you don't.
Hmm.
Go outside. As soon as you get to a point where you can't talk to yourself or nose breathe, you're past it. Figure that
Right.
out. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. And that, all of that, same with the dirt bike stuff, with the skills and drills. Like, I
Hmm.
don't have this, I don't have that. It's like, I don't put an aluminum can down for your cones.
Hmm.
I don't know how far apart. Put them so far apart and ride through them and see if you could do it. If you can't, move them closer. If you can, do something else.
Right.
It's endless. I mean, with the trials thing, like, we have a hut now in the winter, so I was able to ride last winter, and
Hmm.
part of it blew down, but we got the back end clean, so we got it set up for this winter, which is huge and very exciting.
Hmm.
Um, but we're confined to such a small space, and yet in 5 months of being in there and riding,
Hmm.
there's an endless possibility of lines.
Yeah.
Is
Hey,
it?
Josh, I have to pause for a minute and use the restroom.
Oh yeah,
We're back. Okay. Yeah, the different lines you're saying and the intensity that you can vary and all the different scenarios you can put together in such a small space.
yeah. Just yeah, imagination and not letting yourself feel like what you're doing isn't good or right or correct. Just
Hmm.
start playing.
Right.
Yeah.
That 10,000 hours idea that I may not live long enough to get 10,000 hours in on the bike, but
Yeah.
it's the
Yeah.
same idea.
Just, there's no wrong way in fitness or riding or anything else. And
Mhm.
there's probably faster ways and maybe more efficient ways, but you're not going to figure that out until you start doing it.
Right.
Yeah.
Great.
Right on. Yeah. Thanks for doing this. We'll have to do it again, like you were saying.
Yeah. Yeah. It'd be, like I said, it'd be good to do it with like Morgan too, who's, 42 and doesn't work out in the gym, but is also very competitive and, is very motivated to do better. And, you know, because he's working on like, okay, how am I going to do this? Because he's riding so much and running a business and a family and everything. It's like, how am I going to get this gym thing in? And I don't think he realizes how much improvement he can make by doing it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, that's definitely a very realistic and um, something that's very personal as far as time, and
Mm-hmm.
time allocation and all that stuff. But if you look at it from like the lowest hanging fruit perspective,
Mm-hmm.
someone like potentially like Morgan, who's already where he is on the bike, and he's got the business and everything. So it's like, where's the least amount of input from an energy perspective, but going to pay the biggest dividends? And it potentially could be something like getting a little stronger and
Right.
in that efficient time in the gym to build some of those energy systems out.
Mm-hmm. To then free up more time for other things
Right.
rather than just riding all the time.
Right. And if you look at, like, I don't know Morgan, but it's going to take him incrementally longer. Like the better you get at something, the longer it takes to make the improvements, right? So at the
Mm-hmm.
beginning, your curve goes up real high and it starts to flatten out. It'll still go up, but it just takes longer and longer and longer.
Right.
And so getting to 80% good at something is actually, you can get there relatively quickly.
Right.
But going from 80 to 90 and 90 to 91.
It's like the fitness thing or a weight loss thing, those first 10 pounds come off really easy. The
Right.
last 10 pounds for, somebody that's obese is really, really hard.
Right. Totally. Yeah. So then if you're on that curve and maybe he's up there in that 80-85% as a rider, wherever, it is,
Mm-hmm.
the gym fitness and strength's down to 40%. It's like, boom, you could come back down to that, chunk that thing up. That's going to help move the riding number up just from the,
Mm-hmm.
energy and the endurance you're going to have on the machine.
Yeah. On an unrelated note, how do you edit your podcast through GarageBand, or what do you use?
Anchor?
Anchor? Okay.
Dane does it.
Okay.
That's a Dane question.
Yeah. Yeah. I use GarageBand and then run it through Alphonic. And then Alphonic has an AI thing that it's free too. You can use it like an hour or 2 hours a month for free. But then the AI balances everything, and you just
Huh.
you just put it in there, put the file in, it runs it through. 3 minutes later, it's done, and it's all balanced. So you might look at that.
Okay. What was it called?
Alphonic,
Alphonic.
AUPHONIC.
Okay. Yeah, I think she does it on what's the Video Pro or
Final Cut Pro.
yeah,
Okay, so
on
you do a
there.
video version too.
Yeah, because we'll put
Okay.
this yeah, with the Zoom, we'll put this up, put
Okay,
it on YouTube.
good.
And then we'll do the audio, yeah, through the website and everything.
Mm-hmm. Great. I'm looking forward to you guys coming down next spring.
Yeah, I am too. I haven't
That'll
been to
be fun.
Montrose in a while. Only once.
Yeah, and the like I said, usually by March we're riding, and sometimes all year. But last year it was, we could get out by March, but it was, I mean, last year was an exceptionally wet year. But
Yeah, it was everywhere.
mm-hmm.
We've had a respite like the last it's incredible right now. It's like 45, 50 degrees in November, which is
Mm-hmm.
more or less unheard of. I have a photo from 2018 riding at November 13th at one of our spots. And that was the last year that it wasn't already 2 feet of snow at this
Mm-hmm.
time. So trying to enjoy it as long as possible, but
Yeah,
inevitable.
yeah. I'll let you get out there and do that.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, it's been fun.
Yeah,
Enjoyed
great talking to you.
yeah. Like I said, we'll have to do it again